Well, good morning, everybody. How you doing? This is Jeremiah. We are going to have a webinar on customizing irrigation. I'm going to go over a couple quick little housekeeping things. I like to go up to that view options at the very top of the screen and exit full screen mode, just in case I need to get anything on my computer. So just make note of where that is, and definitely make note of that Q&A button. That stands for questions and answers. Feel free to type in anything and everything. We'll get that answered. So I'm sure we're going to cover a lot of things that's going to bring up a lot of questions. We had a lot of fun and exhaustion as well in preparing for this, because there is a lot that could possibly be covered. We're going to go over what we can in an hour, but so I'm absolutely sure we're going to run across a bunch of questions because it's pretty vast of what irrigation covers and what we can customize. But other than that, I'm going to remind you this is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch this as soon as Monday on the website. And then other than that, I'm just going to get this handed over to Jake.
Very good. Thank you, Jeremiah. Fun is one way to put it, for sure. We are going to cover quite a few things, like Jared said, but hopefully these are going to be sort of the what you should know, and we'll kind of answer things as they come up past that. But getting right into it, the agenda here, while it might not look like too many things we're going to cover, it is going to be very, very packed, very fast. So if you need to refer back to anything, definitely watch the recording here. But we're going to really go into what you can customize, where you can customize those things. We kind of break it into four main categories. We're going to be talking about templates, and we'll talk about more what we mean by templates, but our preference sets, our blocks, even keyboard commands, but really understanding those proper practices within each of those areas, and also keeping in mind that each one of these sections that we cover are not just in and of itself. They are definitely connected throughout in some way. So while it might seem like we jump around a little bit, I'm going to try to connect the pieces on what you should be thinking about as you're customizing things, because definitely if you're undergoing a very severe customization that you're trying to accomplish, things could potentially go south. So if we have time, we'll definitely try to cover some of those troubleshooting steps. So before we get too far into it, just understanding the terminology that we're going to go with. So we know that we have a standard created for plans that we do, and there's definitely a lot that goes into that. So where does that content get stored? What we might be used to, what we're doing currently, might be what we'll call templates, and that is strictly in a CAD-based context here. So where we might want to define those text styles, have our dim styles, our line types, even our equipment sort of built out, schedules. We might even bundle the blocks right up into that template as well that we're just pulling from, copying and pasting or inserting. But we want to kind of take a step back and talk about how we look at things. And we consider using templates as well, but we kind of break it into two main categories. You have your CAD file template, which is sort of the way that you want to draft, and that's making sure your units are set properly, you have the right layouts, the settings and how things are going to be looking is set properly. But we also have a template related to the land effects content and what's concerned with that project specifically. And that's what we're going to be going into more today when we talk about templates. But then we also have what we consider preference sets. The skilled users and the advanced users that are here obviously know what those are, but anyone watching fresh, the preference set is kind of that home base for a lot of the things that we want to keep consistent and standardized, from the text styles and the dim styles and the layers and that kind of stuff. So we'll kind of get into how to customize that a little bit more and what you should be aware of. And then again, we have blocks just like everybody else. It's just CAD stuff. So we just consider using that in more of an organized fashion because blocks are pulled in automatically as they are needed. So we have a way to set those up. So we'll kind of go over that kind of thing as well. And then keyboard commands across the board is tailoring things to how you actually want to function through the system. So yes, LandFX is very powerful in and of itself. Just default boilerplate out of the box, you can do designs very, very quickly. Add the equipment that you want, assign already, or don't even have to assign symbols, but everything is already pre-assigned. But you can customize it, and you can tailor to the liking that you need, symbol-wise, textile-wise, call-out-wise, but just a little bit of an understanding that as you are customizing things to your liking, it is going to be structured a little bit differently, bringing in the automation standpoint of things, being able to kind of have the system function a little bit differently is going to pend or bring up a few other challenges from the old way that you might be doing it. But this is a great time to start reevaluating those standards. As Jeremiah and I were talking, he made a great analogy from even using Google Drive versus a server as we store things. Being able to migrate our content over to a more centralized spot, it gave us that ability to relook at those standards, be able to maybe improve upon the old way that we were doing things. So this is kind of along those same lines, being able to start looking at the way that we used to do things and getting it into a more updated and customizable standard, making it a lot more sustainable for that. So we're going to be talking just briefly before we get into showing things live, kind of the ins and outs of some of this stuff. So customizing those templates, understanding that functionality, what a template consists of. Now, you can see from the images to the right there that this is really going to base what equipment that we use on a regular basis. It is created and managed through a LandFX project. However, once that project is set up, there are definite rules about how that should be used. And we will go through that and create one in just a little bit here. But just understanding that if we do create a template and we do add in all of the equipment that we're ever going to want to use, there are some things that you need to understand. That as you set that template and you start a new project, that this project is going to be pulling from that template data, and it's going to be pulling it and plopping it into essentially a new LandFX project outside of the actual template that you created. But what comes with that, or what doesn't come with that, is the following list. So we want to make sure that the flows are updated and the radiuses are updated based on our master database of the live data from that manufacturer, and even the PSI from a valve, the pipe, backflows, that kind of equipment. Those are pulling from a different location. So this is updated as it gets pulled into a new project. However, there are some other things, such as the symbols that were used, the models that are available to you in that piece of equipment that you may have added, the descriptions that you might have customized or that we have adjusted that you've customized, and then any new sizes or nozzle options or even discontinuation of product. Those kind of things are just going to be left alone, and you're going to be using somewhat of an outdated style. So the best practices here would be that you kind of use those templates with discretion. What I mean by that is don't just add everything and anything that you're ever going to possibly use from a manufacturer. That template somewhat is deemed unusable because you are not going to use all of that equipment on a project. So being considerate in how you set those templates is going to help with being able to manage those, because what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to audit those regularly. And by audit, what I mean is open up that project file, maybe replace or delete and add back that equipment again, just to get it up to speed with what we've potentially done into the backend database. We work constantly with the manufacturers. They're constantly releasing new products. We are adding different nozzles, removing nozzles, making sure the flows are updated. Just all that kind of stuff kind of harnesses into the reason that you would really want to add that equipment as needed to a project, not necessarily just leave it in a template and hope that it's going to be good. So when you audit those, make it a set. Maybe it's a yearly goal to just go through and audit those things. What we're going to kind of go through as we create a template is consider setting them up in a way that is sort of splits them out into usable templates. So we are going to kind of leave that off to the side for a second, and let's talk about preference sets. So our preferences is basically the home base for any and every kind of style that Land Effects is harnessing and using and pulling into the drawing as you do something. So we're going to obviously focus in on irrigation here, but the valve callout style that you're going to use for a particular project, how you want those to read, the spray symbol families, the size in which the symbols come in, and then all other pipe and unit defaults, how the system functions, what pipe are available, the sizes that you're going to use, even getting into schematic irrigation and customizing that whole realm of things. This home page here is the way that you can keep things standard and make it very, very manageable. So as you set those preferences up, and I'll call it pref set for short, but those should be monitored and controlled by whether it's a CAD manager in your office or by one designated person. This should not be something that everybody goes into and changes on every single project, because this starts to affect how you add equipment into your project and how that equipment and the symbols relate to what is placed into the design. So when we're talking about a continual interconnective sort of theme here, is this preference set is that heart of, as you add certain things, it's pulling from these settings. So being able to create and manage those preference sets is going to be very, very key in keeping a very consistent look. So once you do have that set, being able to back that preference set up so that you have something to lean back on if somebody does go and completely reconfigure how things were set. But that desired standard can be backed up and then set to read only, so nobody other than the admin has access to make those changes. Customizing blocks. So this one's a fun one. One that we're actually going to probably talk the least about, just because it's pretty simple. Blocks are blocks, and we have a complete lineup of what those blocks are, and that little unreadable plan there is, zoom into those, is made up of all the little symbols that are assigned to every single one of our pieces of equipment. And being able to navigate this, we'll kind of go through that and show how you can make changes and customize them to your own. But just understanding that we don't just have blocks in a single file that it's trying to pull from or you're copying from. This is a very structured, each block is split out into its own separate file, and it's very, very organized and clean about how the system is pulling in, and we'll kind of cover how you can add your own things in there, what the system is looking for regarding that kind of stuff. So just as a general rule of thumb, review the default blocks in our Getting Started guide, which I'll show in a little bit, just to get an understanding of the looks, because there we could go back and forth all day of whose symbols are better, but circles are circles. We might even have something that's very close to what you're trying to do. So just make sure you're familiar with everything before you start trying to customize stuff. And then stick with a same or a similar naming convention when you're renaming or saving those blocks, because as we integrate this automated process and this ability to create these really nice customizable things, the system needs to look for stuff still. So if it can't, or if it doesn't know what to look for, it's not going to be able to show up. So just understanding that there is somewhat of a structure to, or a method to what you're doing, stick with that as much as possible. And last but not least, customizing keyboard commands. We know that you want to keep your really fancy, cool keyboard commands if you've set those up, and we say go for it. Customizing your commands should be something that you do, make that efficient for what you do. Now, we have all kinds of resources and knowledge-based articles that correspond to every single one of our commands in the system, and you can use those and utilize those to edit those and create aliases and create your own shortcut keys. But this is also a great example of being able to evaluate those standards, what you're used to using and what you want to pull over should be totally acceptable. However, just like the ability to relook at those standards from a broad level, understanding that as these features and this interface improves, that there are definitely faster ways of doing things. So a great example of that is our docked irrigation manager. Before, you had to go up to the ribbon to be able to play something. Now we can dock that irrigation manager and access everything from that specific dialog box without needing to go up to the ribbon. And further, we have customized shortcut keys as we're placing things. So we'll get into how to create a shortcut key, but just understanding that you might even be able to relook at how many commands you are trying to put into the system versus how many commands are already there to eliminate or reduce the amount of commands that you got to remember, which is a great thing as you start hiring on new people. Being able to standardize those keyboard commands into something that's already documented out and easily accessible to those who are not familiar with maybe a very unique way of setting up your office keyboard commands is a great way to help speed up the workflow and speed up the process of other people who are not quite familiar with those. So gonna stop right here. Jer, are there any questions before we get rolling?
We just had a really good question from Brian, just asking, how often should you audit that template, and I just suggested, definitely annually, would be good. You can rebuild the whole thing from scratch to be sure it's pulling the most recent data, but you can also use the replace button for any one particular piece of equipment. And that'll swap it out with just the most recent information for that one particular model. So definitely a combination of the two to keep your template up to date.
Cool. All right. So just before we get into CAD, a few links that I wanted just to make known is on our website, the customizing documentation that we have. So customizing this, whether it's customizing irrigation or anything else here, we got great resources to help walk you through a lot of what we are going to kind of cover today. But the Irrigation Getting Started guide, as I discussed down at the very bottom, of this is the symbols that we utilize and have available. So just keeping in mind too that as we discuss symbols and as we look at things, we're definitely talking about them in paper space, how they're going to read on paper, what the size is. So to consider that as we kind of create your own, or you're putting stuff into the system. We've kind of methodically gone through and tried to find the best readable things at a specific standard scale, 1 to 20, and see how those will look on the page. So keeping that in mind as you're customizing stuff is pretty important. But we'll also now show this kind of stuff. Here is the irrigation specific keyboard commands, but we definitely have this page for all other items throughout Land Effects 2. And what is important here to understand is there is a command that you can just type into the command line. So you could remember these if you wanted to for any one of these buttons. And so as we get through and trying to place equipment and stuff like that, each one of those has a corresponding command that it's referencing. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of pick one right now, and we're going to kind of make that into our own little shortcut key. So something that's very, very important, obviously, is being able to place a head into the drawing, but we need to obviously have equipment in here first off. So let me go ahead and I'm just going to add something new. And as we're talking about this, and I'm just going to we're going to kind of backtrack in just a little bit here, but I'm going to go ahead and just pick something that we have some equipment in already. So we've got our pieces of equipment here, and we can go ahead and place this guy into the drawing. So there he is. So we want to be able to, if we've got a lot of different things going on in this drawing, to be able to just grab a head and keep going. So one of our tools is our match head tool, match equipment right here. So you could hover over it. You can see what that command is. You see that match head right there. So that's what we're going to try to find a resource for, or a shortcut key for. So here in our manage options, we have our edit alias command here. So we could essentially type alias edit or simply click on this guy. It's going to bring up our alias editor. This is essentially showing all of the different commands that are available, and we can add a new one. And it's going to say, okay, so what's the alias going to be? What's the key that we want? And again, as just a somewhat of a general rule, it'd be good that you knew going into it what commands already existed, so you're not overriding things and making a headache of things. But what we want is maybe MH for match head. So we'll see if that's there. And here's where we're going to find that AutoCAD command. So we can start typing match to see if it exists, but it doesn't look like we actually have it in this list, which is obviously important to know what exactly we're trying to call here. So I know that it's match head because we hovered over and we saw that command there. Again, we can also figure out what it is here. So if we were going to go to our layout tools here, we could see right here, match head is the command. So I could copy and paste that in there if I wanted to. But we'll go ahead and we'll simply set it here and we'll say okay. Now it's telling us, hey, this is a new command. You want to add it to that list. So we'll say yes. It's going to think about it. It's going to process it. And it's going to add it right into that main command alias here. And once we apply those changes, maybe apply those changes. It's not letting me get over to that dialog. There we go. It's going to tell you that it already exists. Override it. This is essentially the main alias edit page here. So we're going to say yes, and it's going to be saved and it's going to be updated, and we can just hit OK. So let's think and let's see if this actually worked here. So if I were to go ahead and I could just use this tool here to click on this head, it picks it up and I can just start placing it. Let's try our MH. It automatically fires it, I can pick it, and I'm going. So right off the bat, it's that simple to just quickly grab whatever tool that you want, turn it into that, that command, and keep going. So now we're going to run that command one more time and kind of go over the additional things, just as I was talking about those additional features to make things even quicker. And that was simply pressing K as I'm in placing a head, and to see all of the already available commands and functions as you're doing something. So all of this is here to help speed up that placing of heads. So the fact that we've increased the speed to grab that head, now we can utilize what's already there to be able to speed up the placement of that kind of stuff. So being able to place, press V, copy a long line, and continue on. Change my nozzle size if I need to, and again, keep going, that kind of stuff. So on the fly, being able to change and modify things, that's where those keyboard commands are really utilized pretty hard there. So I've set up a couple other ones. I think that hits home what that is. I want to move on unless, Jerry, you think we need to answer anything else there?
I think you hit it perfect.
Awesome. So we're going to now kind of back up, and we're going to talk about templates and the importance of templates, how those kind of function, and how you can adjust those. So it's very, very important to note that from a template and even a project standpoint, you do not need to, and you probably shouldn't be in an actual drawing that you've been placing stuff already. Reassigning projects or overriding what you're doing in a certain project is definitely going to harm the data that's already placed into the drawing. So what I would recommend is just opening up a blank drawing. It doesn't matter what it is, and I think this is one of the hardest things to grasp here is I don't need to save this drawing. I don't need to do anything. The changes that we make are kind of instant, and they're live to the actual database itself that you've got going on. So we're going to go over to our FX admin tab, and we're going to go to our project list. So the project list is where we house all of the projects and the templates. And as we start a new project, we click this new button, and what we're doing here is essentially setting up that template. So we want to make sure that we're naming it in a way or in a fashion that is very clear to the end user or the other employees that they should not be using this for any one of their projects. Okay, so you can see here in the list that I have a 00 template, and it's a client X, don't use. It's very clear that this is not supposed to be used. And this number here is limited to about 12 characters, so it can't be a huge long list. So come up with a way that you can really customize or represent what kind of template it is that you're trying to use here. So maybe that 00 is the client number or indicator that it's very specific to what they're going to be using. So we'll just set up a new one really quick, and we'll call this client Y. And do not use. So something like this, very, very clear. here's where, again, this is pulling from a different part of the program, our preference set. It's going to start and it's going to base everything that you're going to do into this project off of this specific preference set. So it's almost one of those chicken or the egg, which one comes first. I would definitely recommend getting that preference set to your liking before you started creating all of your projects, all of your templates, because if those change down the line, then you're going to have a mismatch, and that's where we're going to have to start straightening things out here. But we're going to say, okay. Now this template is essentially a project now, okay? While it's named template, it's a project, and we can start adding our irrigation items to it. It's going to be blank and that kind of stuff. So we want to basically add the content that we want to be in this template. So as we're talking about a proper template and what should be included, consider what equipment that you're going to use 9 times out of 10 on a project. So don't add everything of what you might use. I would say try to stick with the 1 to 2 things per category that you're really going to use every time. Whether that is specific to a city that requires you to use Rainbird products because that's what they buy for their maintenance team. Or maybe it is a client that only wants Irritrol on their project or on their sites. So focus on that, and that's what's going to go into this. So we'll go ahead and we'll just add this Hunter Pro Spray, and he's 4-inch. And we're going to add him to the project here. So as we start building out this deal here, here's the other way that we can start to customize and understand what you want things to be like for your template. So maybe I wanted to use the Hunter nozzles, but I preferred the Rainbird bodies. Again, Inland Effects, we're just focused on that performance data. The body is not something that is affected by any means, so we can simply edit this, and we can change this to say Hunter nozzle with Rainbird 1800. Change this right here, 4-inch, 18, and we can actually say 1804 inch pop-up. Do something like that. Make the detail, the description customized to your liking. And this is what is going to be generated into the schedule itself. Okay. So once that is done, we simply say okay. And now we're starting to really customize that equipment to what we want it to say. This is going to be part of the template, and we're not going to have to change this every time we add a new product. You can just simply import it in. It'll be set up the way that you want. So we're going to go ahead and just place one valve in here. And we'll grab the desired valve that we want. And maybe that one, I just wanted to call it RCV. Now, here's where we're going to start looking at the symbols a little bit too later on here, but this is where you can now start to customize the symbols that you use. And it's important to note that as you add equipment to the project, it's just going to go down the line and assign the next available symbol automatically. After the fact, you could put them all the same if you want, but clarity purposes would argue that you should continue to use different symbols for all the different valves that you put in. So we could, if we wanted to, rename these files. It's telling us what those files are, essentially. And we could rename those so that if I didn't want my standard valve, the one valve that I add to be a circle, I could rename them so that 004 was my typical valve style. Or again, saving in my own symbol into this here and picking that and naming that RCV001. But being able to actually customize how that symbol gets assigned and stuff like that is right here when we're adding that equipment. So we'll say okay to that. That's totally fine. And now we have our valve. So once we start getting all this set up, again, we're still not in any specific drawing. We don't need to save anything. It is still now landed right here in our project list as our O1 template. So how do we actually make that a template? Well, glaze just down right here and save as a template. So what we can do is start creating these, and maybe this is for client ABC. So we know that as we start a project for this client, this is the template that we pull from. It's not just irrigation equipment template, broad, very everything included type of a thing, because now I've got to spend the time to try to strip out the stuff that I don't want to use versus being very specific to what I'm going to use almost all the time for that specific client. And if I have to add something after the fact, again, that's still best practice anyways, to add what you need to the project instead of taking away all the stuff that you don't want. And just making sure that it's that way. So we'll go ahead and add him. And now you can see I have a template line, and all my templates will be very clearly defined right here. So when I start a new project, again, being able to now say, this is my test proj right here. And I can base it on a template now. And as I base it on that template, I can choose what items get pulled into that template. And obviously considering or knowing and keeping in mind that as I created this template here, I did use the preference set imperial. Make sure that those are lined up, because everything that you add after the fact will match if you're using that same preference set. But if I've customized that preference set and changed symbol styles, and I add stuff back to the actual project here, the stuff is going to start looking a little different than the original way it was placed, whether it was the size of the symbol, symbol style, that kind of stuff. So we can say okay. It's going to basically create that project, and I can see that if I go to my irrigation, I'm going to now have those two things. It's not referring back to that template in any way. So if I change that template, it's not going to affect this project. But now I have my own stuff that I can start from here, and if I need to make changes, I can without hurting the template itself. So making changes, it's just as simple. You're essentially going to open up that do not use file, make your changes, and save it back in and overwrite your existing one. Okay, so that's all that it takes to do that from a adjustment standpoint. But the other, I guess, positive and benefit from a template itself is that you can create that custom equipment. So when we're talking about custom tree rings or emitters or auxiliary equipment that might not be in the system, and you create your own custom sets of that with their own custom descriptions, that's a great way to hold all of that information and then pull from if needed. Because I can actually import now. And if I import, let's just say, let's actually make sure that I'm on the right project here. Yeah, so I'm on my project here. So I can actually import, say I didn't have anything there, I can still import. Let's just get a backflow. Let's go to that template that we've created, and it'll pull in all of that information from the backflow perspective. I didn't have to go and add it new, but he was maybe customized a little bit more than what was boilerplated in our database, and so you can pull it in. You don't have to make changes, and you can just go. So, any questions before I move on?
Definitely had some good questions, and I was able to get them answered. So I think you can keep on going. We can recap them at the end.
Cool. All right, so we're going to move on to preference sets here. And preference sets, definitely the links that I was showing you before from the customizing perspective, the preference set is a whole database of little articles that will show you the ins and outs of everything here. But this is our home base. This is where everything gets kind of pulled from and referenced. So as you look through our general tab, here's all of our text styles. This holds the way that our lateral and mainline size labels, holds how our text title and our schedule text is going to be fonted out and sized from a font perspective. So being able to edit that and see what size it's going to be, always referencing paper space, end result. And then our layers. Everything that LandFX generates and places into the drawing has a specific layer. So being able to customize all the irrigation items that we have here, being able to edit any one of those and adjust it. I'll show you just a simple thing. Having these multiple preference sets, then being able to customize to a specific client's needs or a specific style that you need to match for a certain client, being able to simply switch that preference set and have all of the layer naming conventions reassigned so that as you do the same exact steps and placing things, they end up being on the proper layers and they end up being in the proper font styles and sizes. But we're going to bump right over to our irrigation and show that same thing. Our valve callout, super important to understand that, you know, the valve itself gets assigned a callout style, and that callout style is generally a pretty consistent, not changing thing. But being able to set your standard look here. I've created this new custom one here that also shows the valve type of what is being irrigated. But these are our default sets here, and then this guy over here. But just understanding that you can add your own even past this or modify our own and just update what's already there. Keeping in mind that you should still stick with this naming structure so that it plays nice is what we'll kind of go over in just a little bit when we edit some stuff. But being able to see the spray symbol families assigned. So as I add, here's where that interconnectiveness comes into the template or the way that I add a piece of equipment to my project. If I add a turf spray, it's going to be referencing our family 1 symbol set here. So when we're looking at the styles that we want to keep to and all that kind of stuff, we want to be able to pick either the closest one to our standard or choose one that we're not going to use ever and adjust it. The top 3 are rotating symbols, and these ones are fixed, set to always come in sort of straight up and down this way. So being able to pick from that, this vast list here, we'll kind of show that real quick in our irrigation symbols. So this is what it's referring to when it talks about families. You can see that I have all my different family sets. Within that family set, I then have basically any nozzle that's available to a manufacturer is going to be kind of represented in one of these fashions here. So what you can see is that we've got a description of what that symbol represents, and then this blue title here is the block name. So it makes it really easy for you to navigate back over into our actual folder structure. If I were to go ahead and grab this area here, if we're going to go into our spray category, these are these blue titles are the names of these files here. So really quickly, you can start to go into any one of these files, customize it to what you want it to be, save it, and the system's going to reference these names as it goes to pick based on the equipment that you've added. So if we follow that yellow brick road, for example, this 5 radius here, and we follow this yellow brick road up into his little chart, these are the schedule symbols. And this is essentially any nozzle set for any one of those manufacturers. So as it is a manufacturer that that you've added to the program and you use a 5, it could be that it's going to pull from this set here. And what's really nice is when you customize that single individual symbol, it will update the schedule symbol as it's placed. But just understanding that these guys also have their own files, and that file exists in not the same category, but in our schedule symbols category here. So keeping in mind that you can update if you do decide to change one of those families, what's visually seen there, you can update that slide so that you know that that's the one that you've customized. But in essence, this will change, but maybe you wanted to lay out that block a little bit differently. Maybe do it in 2 rows so that it wasn't so wide in your schedule. And so that's kind of where I'm going to leave that. But we have great documentation on how to customize these, great power tips that show very specifics in that. So I'm not going to belabor that too much more. But you're going to also see then in this list all of the additional, so those are sprays, all of our emitters, all the rotors and rotaries with their corresponding little nozzles here for those single nozzled rotor style options. And all those symbols, sort of we'll call them less complex than all the different families, but we sort of make that an on-the-fly option because you can pick and adjust those on the fly. So those are actually done just as you add that equipment. So it's just a little bit different, but that spray family is such a key one that that shouldn't ever really change too much based on what you're using, that it sort of deserved its own spot in there. And Jared, I don't know if you want to maybe explain that a little bit better, but
yeah, I wasn't following. Sorry, I was answering the question.
The question you just answered, basically, of the reason why we have sprays in preferences.
Just the way it just sprays seemed really near the default symbol. Because it was just so imperative. And in fact, when we're talking about customizing symbols, people always are really, first and foremost, they're talking about their spray symbols. And so it was just such a definitely had to be in preferences sort of thing, as opposed to rotors. Many projects won't even have a rotor. And so then when you do have a project, maybe you'll need 3 different models of rotors. And so it just seemed kind of silly to say, well, what's your default rotor symbol? Because, when you have to use a rotor, maybe it's a 1 to 50 plan. And so that's going to impact your choice of symbol. And so it just seemed to be far better suited to pick your symbol on the fly when adding it to the project. As opposed to sprays where it's like you're just, 95% of the time, you're just going to have turf and shrub sprays, and you want those symbols consistent on every project. That was our logic. I'm certainly not saying it's the ultimate perfect logic, but that was the logic that resulted in this system. And our newer style of picking the drip emitter symbols, was an ability to roll up all those different families, also picking it on the fly when adding. And I personally think that drip emitter style is really nice. And so I think, if anything, I'd like to move more in that direction for everything other than sprays. I personally still feel that works really well to have sprays and only sprays have a default, but I'm totally open to other input. I'm just saying the rationale.
Yeah, no, that's good. Great explanation. So talking about the preferences here, just a little bit more, understanding what it's going to affect. So we have picked our symbols here, and we've got this little option down here from a symbol scaling perspective. So maybe you do want the symbols to come in a little bit smaller than they typically would on a plan. Again, not validating that you should be making a preference set for each scale that you use, because that's a little overkill. The system is going to scale those symbols appropriately for the plan that you do have, or the scale that you have for your plan. But maybe you do want the symbols just to come in at half size of what it is. But having the flexibility to adjust those here, that does affect, as you add that to your equipment, to your manager there, that it is going to respect the new size scaling factor. So one more reason why this shouldn't be always modified and changed, because you can end up with multiple sizes of that same equipment, and then it's just an unraveling mess there. But just understanding that we can manage these things, and if you look at the settings that I have here versus if I just simply go over and quickly use this guy here, my families that are assigned are different. The scales set differently. My callouts all now set up nicely, which means as I start a project, I don't need to worry about any of that stuff. Making sure that I just use the right preference set will get me on the road to being consistently the same look that I'm going for. And the same goes then with pipe data defaults. I want to just touch on that one really quick, because this is super important. We've rolled out obviously way more different styles or classes that we can have available there for laterals and for main lines and even sleeves. But the ability to change this to, we'll call it the 80% of what your projects are going to be. So whether or not you have potable versus non-potable, I don't think it warrants having a completely different preference set for non-potable. But to be able to skip a few classes and set up some non-potable versions of the stuff that you're gonna, the pipe that you're gonna be using here, is super awesome, because the system's going to handle things automatically. So what I've got set here to use is looks like schedule 40, everything, and then I don't have anything for number 2. But if I were to go into my customized and go into my pipe data defaults, this guy, I've got set different ones. I've removed some of the sizes that I don't want to use. And I could even then go a little bit further here and know that I wanted to only go up to 1.5 inches with that guy and set up another style. And we'll just use class 200 there, and we will remove up to that and basically start from 2-inch on up, and the system will automatically start sizing based on these and jump it up and change classes automatically. So setting the pipe up to how you want it, being able to define the layer style and the line type that you want to be your sort of your default there. We've set a unique line type and a unique layer to each one of the classes, but feel free to load and customize that so that as you start your drawing, it starts the way that you want it to. All of that stuff is handled right here in the preferences itself. And if you need any other help with that, this help button is going to kick you right over to the preferences and starting to understand where you can change things. Watch the videos that go into preference editing a little bit more. All that's kind of handled right there from that perspective. So we've got just a little bit more time, and I think that gives us just enough to cover our block stuff. So we are going to jump right into it, and then we'll end with questions. So like I said, it's really important to understand that there's a naming convention to things and how things are actually being pulled into the system itself. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to import our remote control valve from our template real quick. Pull those in, and I'm just going to use this guy, and we'll just do one more if I have time to do it. Our backflow here, just so you understand what the system's kind of trying to do here. So as the system is looking at what symbols to assign it, it's going to be looking at the particular categories. So if we're in valves, auxiliary equipment, into drips, or into heads, all those are represented into one of these fashions here. So all of our different symbols are into one of these areas. So our callouts for our valves are going to be here. Our main line and our lateral line piping callouts are going to be in here. But we want to go into valves first. So you're going to see all kinds of different valves. We got our check valves, and we got our air relief valves, and our hose bibs, our manual control valves, our master valves, our quick couplers, and then we get into our RCVs. So there is a structure and there is a method to the madness, and as Jared and I were discussing it, there's definitely room for improving our standard in how we actually start looking at this, and it's definitely something that I think we're going to be looking into. But for the time being, just understanding that we might want to modify this guy. So I'm just going to open up RCV01. And maybe for some reason I did want to adjust him specifically to look like this with this triangle. Now I could take this symbol of mine and I could just Control Shift C to copy to base point, and I can pick the middle of this guy, and then I can just come over here. And I think this is the easiest way, especially if you want to just ignore R's altogether and just modify it. R's are always going to come in at the insertion point at 0, 0 here. So that's the one thing to keep in mind is if I'm placing stuff, I can go ahead and Control Paste. You can see that this symbol is going to be much bigger than my symbol here in the drawing here. So what we want to make sure we do, I'll move it over here, is that we correct this. And I think starting in our file is a great reference point to making sort of the changes that we want more applicable and keep with the same kind of method, because we have gone through and we have sized things to be at a proper size so that they come in right every time. So we could essentially scale this guy and reference our 2 points real quick and just drop him down. And again, finesse him however you want to, but that looks pretty good for my purposes. So I can now remove him. I could select this information here, and I could grab him and move him to 0, 0 and save this into the system. So once I save that file, if I come back over to my design here and I'm looking at my valve and I look at this, you can see that it's going to look the same. So let's go ahead and try to place him. Oh, well, that doesn't look like the symbol that I have in the slide there. Well, that's because I forgot one really, really important piece, and that is we need to zoom extents and we need to shoot a slide, and that's M slide. If we M slide and save it just right back into here, we can override that other slide file. And if we come back here and we look at our piece of equipment, you can see now that that slide is updated. So it's that easy. It's that simple to either replace our stuff or, again, add your own and just rename RCV 001 to our and make a copy of it and name it 006. It's really that simple. So I think I'm going to leave it right at that point because we are at our hour. But is there any last questions, Jer?
Well, there were some really good questions that I was able to answer. Sent a few links here, for instance, on where to download that irrigation symbols document you were showing.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, but our other documentation, which you also showed from the help button of preferences. So just a reminder to everyone that, this is recorded. We're going to put some of these links will be right on the recorded webinar page. But of course, they're all right there on the website. And if there's anything else that we missed or comes up in your head over the weekend or whenever, please feel free and email us.
Yeah, I'm going to leave one more last closing bit of information, and that's if you've just gone wild and you've customized all of our stuff and you've just messed things up completely, it's an awesome feature, but delete the files from the Landifix folder, and it will download fresh. All of our stuff's cloud-based, so you're never too far away from just starting over with some fresh, new, clean drawing files. Do that. Just don't delete the ones that you've customized and you're happy with. So that would be my only last bit of advice as you're going through there. But other than that, I think have a great weekend, guys.